My name's Estelle. This is my third time speaking at SF-HTML5. My second talk was on web performance, and it was, I think, still the longest talk that SF-HTML5 has ever had. I'm going to break that record by a lot. So I'm going to be talking about CSS selectors, and a lot of people think CSS selectors is pretty easy, and the first 3-4 slides are going to be super easy for people who have experience, or even if you don't. If it's not super easy, that's fine too. If you're just learning, that's great. If you're just learning, you're going to get lost. Don't worry. Just sit back, relax, enjoy the show, and realize the power of what CSS can do. So, some people might get lost. You're thinking selectors, how could I get lost? I know CSS. Don't worry, I'll lose you. But just realize that this is what CSS can do, and when you need it, you know it can do it, and you can look it up. So these are some of the CSS selector profiles that we're going to go over. If you see on the bottom, it says estelle.github.io/CSS, which stands for California Style Sheets, I hear. Cute, sexy speaker, maybe. /selectors. If you go to my GitHub, these are not posted. They're online, but they're not posted from my homepage on GitHub because I finished them. I've been working on them, this slide deck, for several years, and I updated it 2 weeks ago, and I updated it again today. So the newest version, there's no link to it, but there's a link to an older version. And in 4 weeks, I will be presenting this at FrontEnd Masters, so it'll actually be completely available online, and there will be another video of it. So you can watch it on SF-HTML5, or you can watch all 4 days of CSS training. So because this is a 90+ minute talk, I'm going to get started. So selectors. Selectors is how you pick an element to style. And so selectors is on the outer part of the selector block. And then properties and values, we could spend 4 or 5 days teaching you all of those, and we still wouldn't cover all of them. But we're just going to focus on that thing that says selector A or selector B, selector C, because you can have more than one selector in front of a selector block. One important thing to note is if you have an invalid selector, the whole thing is thrown out. If you know CSS, CSS is very forgiving. If you have a property value that doesn't make any sense, it just skips it. If you have a selector that is invalid, it will not skip it. It will actually throw out the whole block, except for if it's a WebKit prefix, because WebKit prefix, they're going to be inventing stuff, and they don't want everything to be thrown out with the bathwater, so that will stay valid. And I have Bruce in the second row who knows all of this stuff, so he's going to be looking at me like, no, you're wrong. If I get it, but here he's like, oh, good, she said it. Because he's like, no, that's not true, the WebKit thing. And I'm like, no, I got you. Okay, so we are going to go through some more complex stuff. So if you see the top one, it says selector, pseudo-class, pseudo-element. So we're going to be going through slightly complex things like that. And then we're going to be going through the attribute selector and relational combinators. So let's get started. The most basic CSS selectors that came with CSS 1 back in 1996 is when it was released, but it was available a little bit before then, was ID selector, class selector, and an LI. So I'm just going to go into so ID, class, and a tag name, basically. So this is my HTML code. I have 3 LIs. 1 has an ID, 2 have classes. It's the same class. You can reuse classes. So in your CSS, you should be using class selectors if you put anything in your HTML at all. Try avoiding using ID. Let IDs be the anchors for JavaScript, because that has a lot of specificity. So in this example, you'll see that 2 elements have a class. They're all different colors. And the reason that the first one is blue is because it's an ID selector. So that has more specificity. I'm going to be talking a lot about specificity. So by the end of this, we're going to go through all the selectors, and then we're going to do a little section on specificity. So after all the excitement of all the selectors, I will make you fall asleep. But stay awake for that part because it's really important, and I think you will if you haven't grokked it, because a lot of people have not fully understood the cascade and specificity. You should by the end of today. So CSS1 gave us the element selector, and it gave us the descendant selector. So a space is basically a combinator that says this is a descendant, any descendant. Could be a child, grandchild, great-grandchild, or further down. If you have the element, an element with a class attribute, you can use that class, put a period in front of it, realizing it's case sensitive. You can do the same thing with ID. And then CSS level 1 also gave us link and active, and those were the first two pseudo-classes. So we could do things like this, span #ID. And I always hated when people did this. I would prefer if you did that, or figure out some other way to tap that element without giving such high specificity, and you'll learn how to do that today. Class, they're all comma separated. And the third one is a.external::link. You can put all those things together. The thing to note is you don't want to increase your specificity by too much. So specificity, I've been saying this many times, specificity is basically which, CSS, it stands for cascading. So the CSS cascades. You'll declare something blue, and then later you'll declare it red. The color is blue, and then you declare it red. Which one is it going to use? It's going to use the one that is most specific, that hits the element, that targets that exact element in a more specific way. And so there's weight. An element here, the A, and the div here is the lowest part. So it goes over on the right and gives you 002. The class selectors, which is a pseudo-class of link, a class of external, and a class of repeated. There's 3 of them. So that gives us a specificity of 030. And then we have an ID, which is unique on the page, and that gives us a specificity of 100. So you put those 3 together, and you have 1-3-2. So that's very specific for just an external link, which if you had done a.external, you probably would have styled it fine in the first place. Or external, because what else is going to be external other than a link? You could have just done .external::link. Okay. So over on the left is the selectors in level 1. In selectors level 2 and 2.1, we got a whole new slew of selectors, and we're going to cover all those today: global, child combinator, adjacent sibling, some attribute selectors, some new pseudo classes, and 4 pseudo elements. Notice in CSS 2.1, there's only 1 colon. In CSS 3, we added the second colon, and we actually added the second colon, I think, in 2.1. It came out way before selectors level 3, but basically to differentiate what is a pseudo class versus a pseudo element. A pseudo class is basically an element that exists, that you're kind of adding a fake class to. You're saying, because it has this, let's assume it has this class. A pseudo element is something that doesn't necessarily exist on the page. It is not encompassed by an opening element and a closing element. It's a portion of an element, or it's several elements put together. So we aren't going to cover those. So I'll cover it right here, because I'm doing selectors and not generated content. Oh, wow. So we're going to cover 90 minutes and not get to those, but before is a generated element that you can create before an element. After is an element that doesn't exist, but it happens after the text node, after all the internals, before the closing tag. So it's inside the element. First letter is the first letter of an element, and first line is the first line of a block level element. Okay, CSS selectors level 3. We got our double colons, but no new pseudo elements. Then we got all sorts of attribute values, and we're going to cover all of this. So I'm going to skip the rest of this slide to go on to the next. We also got UI selectors, which have to do with the user interface in its current state. So whether an element was default selected or not, whether a form control is valid or not. So we're going to cover all of that. And then we're going to cover some advanced features, such as saying, I want to select all the links except for ones with a certain class. And so for that, we actually have a not. We have directionality, we have languages, and we're going to cover all of these, and including some that help with accessibility. And then there's time dimensional, video, and grid structural selectors. And then there's more. We're not covering these, which are scoping, ones that were removed. We're going to cover a few of the ones that were removed because some of them actually still work, and selection. So if you need a cheat sheet, I actually wrote this up, and so you can print it. It has all of the selectors that are currently supported, and there's one that's crossed out, the matches, because it's now is, except for is not supported, but matches is. So I'm trying to give you hints. Okay. Another thing before we start in on the rest of the selectors is the Selectors API. And this is going to come in especially handy because we have a new selector that is a parent selector. We've never had a selector where you can say, choose this element if it has these children. And we do, but it only works through JavaScript. So in JavaScript, you can actually query all the selectors we learned today. You can actually use in your JavaScript to say, hey, find me this element. So we can do a query selector all, and we can put anything here. Here it says foo, but I could have done bar, and then I could have actually done a dot external dot colon link, and it would match those things. So it doesn't have to be a simple, it could be, and only if it's a child of a div, my div, right? You can put complex selectors into your JavaScript. So remember that everything you learned today, if you're not a CSS person, you can use it in JavaScript. If you're following along with these slides later at home when you're watching the video, and you can't move forward on a slide, when you are in something that's editable, the right-left arrows don't work because that would be a pain in the tushy. So there's the next buttons, or you can just click anywhere outside of the slide and you'll be able to move. Okay. I have used the query selectors in the slide that's coming up almost next. Okay. And we talked about specificity. I'm going to give you another brief intro to specificity. Actually, I covered most of this already. But I created a specificity. It's actually called Specificity. So if you go to specificity.com, there's this a PDF. And it explains the selectors. It explains the global selector. It explains the element selectors, which are represented by plankton. The fish is a class selector. And what you'll see is that the attributes here, an li plus an attribute, is kind of like an element and a class selector. It has the same weight. The attribute selector, so here, my class is a class selector. Type checkbox, which is an attribute selector, has the same weight as a class selector. A pseudo-class, only of type, has the same weight as a class selector. I've explained to you the weight of the heaviest weight being on the left, the lowest weight being on the right. So the elements are on the right, the IDs are on the left. The middle one is the class. You may note that in here, I use the shark for an ID. It's kind of an opinionated chart. It says sharks aren't very nice. They have a bad rep for a reason. IDs, don't abuse them. They might look good in the aquarium. You don't want to encounter too many of them in the water. The inline style is the BP oil tanker. You don't want to use that. And the important is the nuclear bomb option. Okay, so global selector. The global selector matches everything. And by everything, it matches things that you don't typically want to match. So in this case, I did star color green and body color red. Let me just increase it in size a little bit. And then hide it up there. Bring it down some. Okay. So star color green means select everything on the page and make it green. Well, you kind of want your links to be a different color, and you want your text input to be a different color. Like, it's actually, if you're doing global sign padding 0, you're getting rid of the padding on all of your elements, including inputs and, well, selects you can't really style, but just, you're doing too much. So the selector, the global selector, they say it has no specificity. It does have specificity. It has a specificity weight of 0, which means it will match an element. It'll match all the elements, but it won't add any weight to it. So it does have specificity. It has a specificity of 0. So let's go on to relational selectors and combinators. Here, we've talked briefly about the descendant selector. So there's a space between the li and the ul, and that says match any list item that is the descendant, the child, the grandchild, the great-grandchild of an unordered list. Here, we say match the list item that is this child, grandchild, great-grandchild of an ordered list. So you're matching them twice. You're matching it here, the A, as part of a list item that's a grandchild, and you're matching it again as the child. So that's why it's twice as dark, because it's inheriting the background color from its parent, and it's both of them are getting hit. If you basically say put a greater than sign, you're saying no, just hit the child. So there it's saying match the LIs that are a descendant or the child of an ordered list, but not an unordered list, not anything else. If I were to do just the child of the unordered list, I would just get A, B, and C, and not the other ones, because it doesn't have a UL. It doesn't have a UL as a parent. So the greater than sign is the child selector. The plus sign is the adjacent sibling. It means find the element that I'm linking to, or find the LI, right, that comes immediately after whatever the selector is here. So here it's looking for a list item that has a class, because I really wanted to say has a class like 15 times, plus LI. So it finds the has a class and says, is the next element an LI? If it is, match it. If it isn't, you don't match anything. The tilde is a general sibling. It says find all the LIs that come after the LI that has a class of has a class. Does that make sense to people? I have a sleep barometer. There's a non-technical person in the room, and they're not asleep yet, so I'm doing well. Okay, so if you want to play along with this at home, there's little playtimes, which just gives me an opportunity to show it to you in terms of the cascade. So you'll see that number 5 is orange. If you're not colorblind, I apologize for doing this via color. 6 and 7 are blue, 4 is red, because it says find the element that has a class of my class. And then if you find an LI that's an adjacent sibling, make it blue. A general sibling, make it blue. And the one right next to it, make it orange. If I were to move this up one row, I wouldn't have anything orange anymore. Because although I'm more specifically matching that one element, like it's kind of like this is specifically exactly what I want, those two, the li.myClass plus li and li.myClass tilde li have the exact same weight, and the one that comes later then overwrites that one that comes before. Make sense? Okay. And if I actually got rid of this, this would still be red, even though almost everything else is blue, because the specificity of a class is more than the plus and the tilde and the greater than sign don't add any weight whatsoever. Attribute selectors. So in your HTML, you can add attributes. In the first case, we say any image that has the alt attribute. So it'll match the first one because there's an alt that says accessible. And then there's, it doesn't match the second one because it doesn't have an alt attribute. And the title says inaccessible because I'm slyly putting in a message there to remind you all to ensure that your markup is accessible, whether it's created with JavaScript or whether you're marking up with HTML. Add accessibility features first time around. It makes it accessible. It's more search engine friendly as well. And it's the right thing to do. So here I have a space here. And it says form space type. So it says match. It's as if there was a global selector right there. It says match any element that has the type attribute that is a descendant of a form. So it would match the input type date, but it wouldn't match the select because the select does not have the type attribute. If I had actually put in the type attribute, I don't know HTML, because that is not actually, the type is not an attribute for select, it would match because there's a type attribute. It's not saying, hey, your HTML is wrong. Okay.
You can make up attributes then.
You can make up attributes, and if you do make up an attribute, you can. The people have been making up attributes since forever. It is encouraged to put the data dash and then your attribute name, because if you put a data dash, you can actually use. There's an API to pull out all of your attributes. So it's actually completely valid code if you start it with a data dash. If you don't start with the data, your HTML is not valid. It's still going to be parsed and executed correctly, pretty much, but you have a whole API if you use data dash. Okay, so what I've shown you so far is you can have an attribute, just the mere existence of the attribute. It doesn't matter what the value is. So here I have p lang, and it says so any paragraph with a language attribute, it will match. Now remember this here, because you can use the language attribute this way, but it's only if that element actually has that attribute. It doesn't say, is this whole page in English? It just says, is this paragraph in English? It doesn't say, is the link underneath it in English? There is another attribute that we will get to later that actually does that. That says, hey, what is the language that I am in right now, even though my parent doesn't say what language I'm supposed to be in. Then you can have an exact value, which is just the equal sign. The quotes are optional if there's no odd characters in there. Put the quotes on. It just makes life easier and easier to read. The pipe equals is a language one, or was put in for languages. But it can be used for many other things, especially custom, like BEM things. So this one says p lang pipe equals en, and what that will match is any attribute any lang. It has to be, in this case, the value of the lang attribute that starts with en and is exactly en, or starts with en followed by a dash. So it matched en-us, en-uk, just en plain and simple, or en em-em, like nmnop, whatever. It's not a smart selector, it's just matching the attribute. Okay, then we have the tilde equals, which means a full space separated word. It could be the first word, the last word, or any space separated word in between. So if I do tilde equals word, in the title it does match because word is a full word. It doesn't say, this would not match if I added an S. So it's tilde equals is the full word. Caret equals means starts with the value. So if you want to do a mail to link, in this example, this is a really good usage of it. It would be a in the brackets href caret equals mail to. So it would be any href attribute that starts with the 6 letters male to. And if you want to be more accurate, that would be better. And then here it says match any attribute that starts with HTTP. This isn't perfect because what you really want to do is do HTTPS : and then comma HTTP and match both secure and insecure. But the general idea is match something. Here you're saying, oh, this is an external link. Later on, I will actually teach you how to find, there's an attribute now called AnyLink that will, or not local link rather, that will find a non-local link. Okay, so next, ends with $equals. Did you have a question?
Yeah, why couldn't you just do HTTP without the S or the...
Because you might have a folder called HTTP archive, something like that. It's basically, you could, totally valid, it's just not as exact. So I gave this talk one time in front of Estelle Weyl, the guy who invented CSS. And Tab Atkins, who writes the spec, was also in the room. And the only comment they had was that this wasn't specific enough. I'm like, I know the slide's only this long. So I left it in, but I correct myself when I give the talk. Don't give a talk when the spec author is in the room. It's a little bit nerve-wracking. Just a wee bit. They were very nice. And that was the only complaint. I'm like, if that's the only complaint, I did a pretty damn good job. Okay, so the next one is $equals, and that means ends with. So this is a really good way to like figure out, like, I'm going to add iconography to tell people it's a Word doc or a PDF or something like that. That's what I use it for. It has many other uses. In this case, I put content afterwards says PDF, so if someone knows they're launching a PDF. In this case, I put a background image of an icon, a PDF icon. So there's a little icon, so they know they're launching a PDF. Okay, then we have $equals, which is basically not really a regular expression because but where does it match? Does it match anywhere? And here I use the same example as before with the word word, but instead of doing this is supposed to be star. Okay, typo. So it's basically, is the word anywhere in there? And there's these 4 letters right there. So if I had just done the letter E, it would have matched here, 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 and just 3 places. So it would have matched. So it's basically anywhere in there. You can use multiple attributes. So this would be a link with a title and an href. I could have put values on that. Here, this would be an input of type number that also has a min value and a maximum value. So you might want to style your numbers that need to be within a range slightly differently. Well, you can figure out how to style that. Ways you might want to style would be actually showing, like doing plus, small, warning, display, block. Like basically say, if you have an input with rules, definitely tell the user what you're expecting, because there's no way to see that from the outside when you just look at the screen. Then we have case insensitivity. So for the most part, these attribute selectors are case sensitive if in the HTML it's case sensitive. There are a few exceptions. I don't know what all the exceptions are. I found the first one and used it as an example and then stopped looking. So I'll get to that in a second. But like an ID is definitely case sensitive, right? When you hit it with CSS, it has to be the same case. If you hit it with JavaScript, it has to be the exact same case. If it's a different case, it's a different ID altogether. If you put an I there, it just basically says match it. It says foobar, but it doesn't matter how it's spelled. So if you had the I here and an element was spelled had an ID spelled like this, it would work. Checkbox is not case sensitive. It is an HTML keyword, and most HTML keywords are not case sensitive. Possibly all of them. I didn't check. So basically, think of it, if it's a string you write, it's case sensitive. If it's not a string, if it's a key term in CS or in HTML, it's not case sensitive. Yes.
Why would you use a case insensitive search for an ID? You've only got one ID in that page. Don't you know what it is?
It was just to give you an example.
Okay.
I couldn't come up with one,
Okay.
but I came up with one for case sensitivity. Things should be case sensitive. Like in this example, you should have your ID be case sensitive. But one of the weird things is in CSS, the target value is not case sensitive because usually they accept a target of underscore blank, underscore, I haven't written that in HTML other than, anyone know what the 4 normal ones that people use are? What? Self, okay, yeah, underscore self. Those are not case sensitive. So basically, it's not case sensitive. However, all the other ones you can invent are case sensitive. So in this example, in this slide deck, whenever I open up a resource, the target is resource and it will open always in the same window. And if I open up an example, it opens up into a target called play because you're playing around with it. So you can have, like, I want you to be able to open a few windows, but not 45 by the end of going through this session. So it's actually case sensitive. That play and that the word play and that word resource that I invented, those are case sensitive. So here is a list of the attributes that are not case sensitive. If anyone wants to look that up, there is a resource. I figured the talk was going to be long enough as is. I didn't want to add that to it. Okay, so anyone have 40/40 vision or haha, like anyone can see that? Okay, so here I have a link to Mozilla, and then the target is ABC all capital, ABC all lowercase, ABC with a capital A, and ABC again with a capital A. So the 3 and 4 are the same. If I open up this one, it opens up in a new window. That's the ABC capital window. If I open up this one, it opens up in a new window. That's the ABC all lowercase window. If I open up this one, it opens up in this window. Now keep your eye on this window right here. If I open up another one, it's going to open up in that same window because they both have the link of ABC. See how it went into the same window? It's case sensitive. However, it's not case sensitive as an attribute value. So that's why you need the S and the I. Bruce, do you know any other reasons why you might need a... No? Anyone else? Bruce has a great list of articles, and I don't think he's linked to an article on this yet, because I don't think anyone has insomnia that bad that they've actually tried to write an article about this. So, why does it matter? I forgot why I put this slide in. It was to show one example in here, and it was really brilliant when I came up with it. If I put case sensitive there, it doesn't overwrite them. So that's just an interesting reason to put case sensitive on something that's generally insensitive. Because you might be like, I want to match all these numbers except for this one number, so I'm going to put type number all capital, and I'm going to reach it, and I'm going to put case sensitive. Okay, it wasn't that brilliant. I tried. It because it's class. Here, because it's class. So I'm just going to do input. Because input, the class is case sensitive. It was the input. That was the brilliant thing I wanted to show you. Thank you for asking the question, because that is input and type. So here I could do I, and why is it not changing to red? Because the I doesn't actually add any specificity. I would have to move this one down. And then it would. Does that make sense to people? Because of the cascade, the I was overwritten because it was the last one. I mean, it was the first one. The I itself did not add any specificity. It made it more specific, right? This is exactly what I want. CSS doesn't care. It's like, what is the weight?
So weight and specificity are the same.
Well, it is considered specificity, but it's the specificity weight versus the normal human beings. When they say specific, they mean like pedantic, right? CSS is not pedantic. What?
Where is the black coming from then?
On what?
Black.
Oh, these are paragraphs. So this is class text, and this is type text, and I've changed it to type. So the black is just the default value of the text. It's not, there's no styles hitting it whatsoever, because I've changed the CSS from class to type, from class also to input. Okay, so this is a brief overview if you ever want to play with them. Here it explains it by hitting the number 2, and there's a little game that you can play. It's not really a game, it's just an example. And should we do any of these? Yeah, let's do this. So here I said make it unicorn. Oh, this would be a good reason why you'd want it to be case insensitive. If you're doing a word within a title, you don't care because the title is a string that you created, it is by default case sensitive. But if you're looking for text within that, you don't really want to be case sensitive. It's like, are we talking about bananas? I don't care if it's capital B or lowercase b bananas. Match my bananas. So here we're matching unicorns, because why not? So because it's case insensitive, the one that starts a sentence that says unicorns fart rainbows, it matches. If I didn't have that, it would not match. If I said, S, it would definitely not match either. Here, href, it says any element with an href, make a text overline. If I did that ends in PDF, it would only be the PDFs. So when you get home, play with this or go to bed. I mean, there are other options. You could play with it in bed and then fall asleep and then or take melatonin. It's less. You can fart unicorns as well. So UI pseudo-class selectors. So UI pseudo classes, they're in selectors level 4, but they were in UI features, I don't know what the name of the spec is, level 3. So they've been around for a really long time, but they weren't in the CSS specification, in the selector specification until level 4. So they're not in level 3, but they've been supported, they've been around for years. So basically it's, what is the status of an HTML element based on content? So we have enabled, disabled, and checked. Those were actually in CSS level 3, and the rest were in 4. So here is the element enabled. Can I mess with it? Yeah. Is it disabled? Can I not mess with it? Is it checked? It's either checked or not checked. So here I have this this selector right here, and you read selectors from right to left. So it says a label that comes immediately after, because this is the adjacent sibling, a checked input of type checkbox, and I added an ID here because the CSS is actually in the document, and so I gave the slide itself an ID. So when you see my examples, the ID is there, but I can get rid of the ID, and it works fine, I think. And I click on the label, and it turns red because I said the label that comes immediately after a checked input of type checkbox. How did I click on the label and make it turn red? Accessibility. Always include labels whenever you have an input because that box is tiny. I'm standing up here. I'm a little bit further from my computer, which makes me better to read it, because at this point I read things here. But it's a tiny little box. The whole label will toggle that little box on and off. So include labels for all of your input elements. So I'm going to put an X right here so that to disable this so that I don't override any other labels that come after checkboxes later on. Okay. So the UI of selectors include valid, invalid, required, the opposite is optional, in range, the opposite is out of range, read only, not quite the opposite is read write, enabled, the opposite is disabled. We also have checked, which we just went over, indeterminate, default, placeholder shown, blank, and user invalid. User invalid I don't believe is in this specification. I believe it's in another specification, but it seemed like the right place to put it. So let's start with valid, invalid, required, optional, in range, out of range, and user invalid. So this is going to be really hard to read, but I'm going to make it bigger in a moment. But first I want to focus on the bottom, which is the HTML that I used. So I have an input of type number. It says minimum of 5, maximum of 7. In HTML, when you have a number, there's a default attribute called step. If it's defaulting, if you didn't include it, the step is 1. So the only numbers that are valid are 5, 6, and 7. Everything else will fail. In the second one, I have an input type number. The minimum is 0. Oh, the top one is also required. So note that it is required, and ARIA required true to let the screen reader know that it's required, which most screen readers now understand required. So ARIA required is kind of redundant, but I keep it in just because I don't know enough about screen readers. Second one says input type equals number, minimum is 0, maximum is 10, and the step is 0.1. So 0.4 is valid, 9.3 is valid, 10.1 is not valid. So the reason I'm starting with that is because I'm going to zoom in so you can see the top, which is going to knock the bottom out of the page. Okay, so we start with ignore the IDs on the start. That's just to make this slide, this only hit this slide and not hit everything. So it says if the input is valid, the border should be green. Well, the second one's not required, so the border's green. The first one is required, and it's not there. So the border, so it's invalid, and it's red. If it's required, which is different than invalid. Invalid means it's not valid because it has to be filled in when it's required. Required is just the opposite of optional. So it could be required and invalid, or required and valid. So if it's required, make the border width 5 pixels wide. If it is optional, make it 10 pixels wide, which is why the bottom one has a border that's twice as big. If it's in range, make it light green. If it's out of range, make it pink. There is no number, so when it's empty, it is not out of range. So I'm going to start by making this valid. It turned green. So it turned green because it is in range, and the border turned green because it's input valid. I'm going to do 5.4. The border turned red, but it stayed green because it's in the range of minimum and maximum, but it's not valid. So that's what these mean. So you don't need to memorize this today. Just know this is all possible. Okay, so here is a page where you can play with it later on. It'll open up in the new page with the target of play. Hopefully it's all lowercase, but I put a case insensitive just in case I accidentally misspelled play one time. Okay, this is kind of a neat little trick. So I have 0 invalid entries. There is no JavaScript on this page. I am going to make an invalid entry, and look at that. I have 1 invalid entry, 2 invalid entries, 3 invalid entries, 4 invalid entries. What did I do? I'm going to walk through this over here. I reset my counter that I called invalid count. On counter reset, I could put invalid count, and I could have made it 5, and the number would have started with 5, but I didn't put anything, so the default is 0. Then I said every time something is pink, invalid rather, make the background color pink, which is how it turned pink, and then I said increment the counter. So counter increment invalid counter, or invalid count. And then in this paragraph that's down here, this is not the right way to do things. I'm just showing you what's possible, not what you should do. I did a paragraph, basically inside the paragraph, I changed the content to you have, and then I put the counter. So invalid counter, I'll put whatever number, and then invalid entries. This is not the best way to do it because if it's 1, it's still 1 invalid entries, and that's not grammatically correct. And someone, if you do that on Twitter, someone will grammar check you. Okay, so let's just make these valid. So 7, down by 1, down by 1, down by 1, and then at. That doesn't look like a valid email, but it is, because if you're on an intranet, you don't actually need the dot whatever. So I'm back down to 0. One thing about that is, because I'm counting, that paragraph had to come after all the invalid entries. If I had put it before on top, I would have always had 0 because I never would have incremented it each time it hit an invalid. Make sense? So that's what you can do with invalid and count. You can do all sorts of really cool stuff. That has nothing to do with selectors, really. But it was fun. Okay. So then we have user invalid. So one thing that's really annoying is when you're typing something and it's not valid. So I started writing my email address, and if I put the letter E, so let's just tell you all what my email address is. If I put Estelle, right, I'm like, it keeps telling me I'm wrong. That's not very nice, right? What if it just told you you were wrong once you left the box? Wouldn't that be better user experience? Coming soon to a place near you is user invalid, which is currently supported in Mozilla as Moz UI invalid. So here, I have a number between 5 and 7, and I just put the number 9. It's invalid, but it's not yelling at me yet. I tab, it's yelling at me. I go back in, still yelling at me. I change it to 5, not yelling at me anymore. Go back down here, go back up here, change it to 5.5. It's yelling at me again because it's the same code as the previous one. Why is it pink instead of red? Because I said background pink and background color red, because input user invalid is not supported yet. But Moz UI invalid is, and when this becomes valid, I will know it right away because it will turn red instead of pink because of the order. The second one will override the first one. So when you are writing selectors and overwriting stuff, you always want to put the correct semantic one after, because you want it to overwrite the previous one, or the prefix versions. Okay. So other UI pseudo-classes, we have read-only, rewrite, enabled, disabled, default, indeterminate, placeholder shown, blank, and then we have empty. And empty is, the reason it's in parentheses is because it's not really a UI thing. It's like an empty paragraph. But I felt that it fit here with blank, so I put it here. So I just put parentheses around it because it's not exactly UI. So I'll get to it in a minute. We'll get to it. So let's start with read and write, or read, write, and read only. So here I have, can you read that? Sorry. Okay, so you see that there's black, there's green, and there's red. And these are select text areas, and this one is actually disabled. So black is disabled, red is read only, and green is read write. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in. Till you can read this. Can you read this back there or not? Is it still too small? It's good. Okay. The one person who is awake, you're all sitting up looking awake, but one person who reacted gave me a thumbs up. So I'm going to stick with it because it was the opinion I wanted to hear anyway. So I did read only as pink. Pink doesn't exist on this page because it's not supported yet. We have a Moz read only that is red. We have a read write that is light green. And we have a disabled that is black. The black is supported because it's been around for a long, long time. So what is read only versus read write versus read only? If an input is, there's an attribute called read only, it will match the read only. So it's not writable, you can only read it, and it'll be read. If I get rid of the disabled, disabled is actually considered read write, which makes no sense. It just basically doesn't match the read only because it's neither, it shouldn't be read or write. So I'm still confused as to why that's supported there. So that's read write and read only. Coming soon to a browser near you. Enabled versus disabled. You'll see these are pink and green and light green because they are supported. The dark colors mean not supported. The light colors mean supported because you would never actually want to have a dark red background on a form control because legibility is kind of important. And also red and green would be really scary for your... So a paragraph cannot be enabled or disabled, even one with content editable. But you might have noticed on the previous page, my content editable was read write. So an input with no attributes is going to be writable and readable and enabled, because by default, the form control is enabled. If I put read only, it's still enabled. It's still going to be submitted with the form. But if I put disabled, it is going to match disabled. That's what disabled is there for. Same things with text areas and select boxes. So you'll see over here we have pink and... okay, then we have one that few people understand, which it's been around forever. It's called default. And so basically I said, if it's the label that comes immediately after the element that is default selected, make it red. So you can't really style a form control, some form controls like checkboxes or others that would be the default value, right? So what is default selected? You can have radio buttons, and you can say they, them here as a gender was default selected. Because for some reason it's always he, and I get really pissed off. So if you're going to do a form, don't put he first. Or did you see the one that was out last week? It was like true was male and false was female. I'm like, great form. But the guy did a great apology, so all is forgiven. So radio buttons, you can default select one. And if you select a different one, it still stays red. So it's basically what was selected, what was default selected when the page was loaded. Similarly, what makes excellent pets? I want a quokka. Quokka? Oh my god, a quokka is the cutest animal. I'm going to digress, and I'm going to pull up a quokka.
We need a clock break.
Yeah. Images.
Oh, it's a rat.
No, it's a marsupial. It's a marsupial. Isn't that the cutest thing ever? Like, quokkas are awesome. And they're like, they love everything. They're just always happy. Like,
Feeding humans who's 20 foot tall.
you feed it people. So I think a quokka would make a great pet. I also think a ferret would make a great pet. My partner and I have been having this argument for 18 years.
Yes, they do.
But you know what? Kitty litter smells. Okay, enough with the pets. But anyway, I think these 4 would make a great pet. I do not think a possum would make a great pet. So it's not default selected. But if I unselect these and just say what my partner thinks would be a good pet, we can see that we've in disagreement. Okay, so that is default. That is what default means. Other UI pseudo-classes, we have indeterminate. So this is completely not accessible, but I'm going to make the label that comes after the checkbox that has that is indeterminate, right? It's not a class, it's a state. And indeterminate is that state that is neither checked nor unchecked. And there is no way to make that bigger. Even if I zoom in, so I'm not going to, but it's basically the square with a line through it. It's neither checked nor unchecked. It's indeterminate. You can only make something indeterminate with JavaScript. It's basically if you have an email list. Did you do the little sign yet or no? Peter? No, keep going. Okay, 4 more slides and then we'll take a break. Okay, so indeterminate is something that a state that you get to with JavaScript. So if you have like an email box, you want to check all of them because you want to just have inbox 0, and the best way to do that is to check all of them and just hit delete. And then you're like, oh, I still need to read that one. So you uncheck that one, and therefore the check that says check all, it's no longer all checked, but it's not unchecked. So it's indeterminate, and that's and you can style based on that. Placeholders shown. In this input, it says change the color above. So it says input type equals no glass, just the bottle. Thank you.
Well done.
Mexican Coke.
Because he didn't want me to drink this? Is that... Thank you, Peter. Okay, so placeholder shown in the input, I have the placeholder attribute, and the placeholder is currently shown because there's no text. I think that's going to be sent to my parents. Look what your daughter does. Okay. Once I enter anything in here, the placeholder is not going to be shown anymore. So I put in the letter B, and it no longer matches that selector. So placeholder shown is really good if you want to style placeholders differently for people who can see the page. And then we have empty and blank, and I spent half the day on empty and blank, which you're never going to use. Empty is an element that has no content. The spec has been changed, so empty is supported, and it is supported on empty elements that basically have only white space. Right now, it's only supported on elements that have no white space. So that could be a paragraph with only a comment, a paragraph with no comment, or it could also be an input, or a hard return, or a break, anything where you put a slash. If you're doing XHTML style code, you can put the slash at the end. That would be an empty element. The spec has changed it to be like Moz only white space, which is not supported yet. Well, Moz only white space is supported, but this part of it is not supported on empty, which is when it's only white space. So empty is going to mean an element that can have a text node, but that doesn't have any text other than white space. Versus blank, which has no browser support, and it means something that has nothing inside, that is an empty element. So that's why it took me all day, because the linguistics of it, when saying blank when it's an empty element, just poof. I'm just too geeky and I think about these things. Yes?
So you can still style it with height using
You can actually, you can style it as empty right now because it's actually supported in empty. It's just they changed the spec. So I spent all day because the semantics didn't make sense to me. But yes, you can style all of them right now with blank, but empty will eventually match Moz white space only, which I have an example for you. So in this example, I have an input, a paragraph with nothing in it, a paragraph with a comment, and a paragraph with a space. Just believe me that that is what the HTML looks like underneath. So I displayed it as flexbox with space around, so I actually put that up there so that you'd see what was going on. And then I put padding so that it would show, because if you don't actually put this in, empty paragraphs don't show. There should be nothing to see because it would be empty. Okay, so I did empty is light green. And so you can see that this is an input. It's supposed to match blank, but blank isn't supported. So nothing is light blue, even though this should have been light blue. And this is still white. It's not light green because there's a space in it. So if I actually did Moz only white space, I think it is. Yeah, that would match all of them, including the one that had the space. So it's not empty, but it will be considered empty when empty is supported. Did I confuse you? Perfect. So I want you to contemplate this while we take a break, and we'll come back and do structural selectors. Don't actually contemplate that. Contemplate all the other stuff. Forget about empty and blank. But we'll take a break because I think I already filled up your brains, and I'm going to fill them up way more after the break. So my name's Estelle Weyl. I am Estelle VW on Twitter, and I'm a Twitter whore, so please follow me. And I'm generally a freelancer. Right now I'm contracting with Mozilla to write on MDN, and I also teach on FrontEnd Masters. So this course is actually the first section of the FrontEnd Masters course. That's going to be live in 4 weeks. So if you want to join FrontEnd Masters, they're fantastic, and they treat their speakers really well, unlike some other places that do it. So I really support them. I think they're great. Not only that, I make money off of it, but they're also awesome. And I also do workshops at companies. So if you want me to do a CSS workshop, a Houdini workshop, or web performance, or accessibility, my cards are here. I brought 300 because 390 people RSVP'd. Then there were like 160 in the room, and then I scared 100 of them away. And now we're going to get to the good part. So I'll leave this up here, and I'll continue. So structural selectors, come up. Okay, structural selectors. So structural selectors, there's a bunch of them. And what they do is they target elements on the page based on the structure of the HTML. So it's based on the relationship of an element with another element, whether that is a sibling or a parent or a great-grandparent, and how many there are on the page. If you update the page, like if you have a table with 17 rows, and you want to select every even row, and you add 27 more rows, you don't have to add any classes. It's going to do that for you. So that's why this was called your code has no class, because you can actually, what you'll learn from the rest of today is you can code your entire app without adding a class name. I wouldn't do that because it's going to give you a headache, but it is possible. So if you don't have access to your HTML, you can still code, you can still mark everything up. So we're going to start with the first child, last child, first of type, last of type, only child, and only of type. So there's two words there. There's of type. Well, that's two words twice. And child. So there's of type and there's child. So child is a descendant. It's a direct descendant. And of type is a type of element such as a paragraph or an H1. So that confuses people. And I'm going to show this by example. So I have this page right here, which I'm going to open up in a new window. And you can see that it says head, last of type, color is orchid, and then text declaration is underline. And the color and the underline don't really matter. Just, I'm going to keep it as orchid and text decoration. You don't need to see any of the text in this. What you need to see, maybe I'll actually make it, since you can't see the top line that well, let me make it, pick a color.
Goldenrod.
Can you read goldenrod though? That's worse. It is a nice color. I prefer papaya whip. Magenta. I like magenta. Nope. Doesn't work. Red, blue. Actually, why don't we do instead, and also do, here I'm going to do font. Wait. Bold. There we go. So you can at least see the top part. So what I just did is I styled the last of type that was in the head. And what do you think the last of type was? It was a style element. So I'm showing the style. The style is in the head. I've displayed it block. And it is the last of type. It is the last style. It's also maybe the first of type. No, there's another style. I guess there's two style blocks in the head. Last of type. It's probably the last child of the head, because I probably did it title, meta tag. There's no JavaScript whatsoever. There's probably a style to make the whole page gray, so I didn't have to show that to you. But it is the last child of the head. It's also the last of the type, because it's the last style. So body, if I do the last child, or the last descendant, I'm going to get the last child of every element. So every parent, the last child that it has is going to turn blue. So in this case, it's it's the last thing. The last one only has an H1. So if I had done this though, right, and made it just the child instead of the descendant, it would just be the last one. Because inside the body, the last child is the div, and it inherits. The color and the text decoration of underline inherits. So that was last child. I'm going to do last of type. Now it's still just the div at the bottom, because the div is the only child of the body. The H1, the paragraphs, etc. are children of divs. So if I actually do div there, I have the last of type in each div. So this H1, which is at the top of the page, it is the first child, right, of that div. But it is the last of its type because it is the only H1. That third paragraph is the last of its type. So it's of type. So it's not saying last child means only the last child. So there, the H1 is no longer connected, because I'm saying, oh, look at all the children and find the last of its type. Find the last child, rather. When I say of type, I'm saying find the div and find the last one of every single type, whether that is, but it has to be a direct child because it has the greater than sign. So it could be a paragraph, it could be an H2, it could be an H3, it could be a link if the link is not inside a paragraph. So let's do that. So let's go with first child. It's the first child of every div. If I did body with a space, it is the first child of every div, and the full div, because this div is the first child of the body. Does that make sense to people? Or am I confusing the crap out of you? Both. Okay, so let's continue on. So only child would be the last one, because that is the only one that only has one child. That div has one H1, it has no paragraphs, nothing else. But if I did only of type, A lot of H1s will turn blue because most of these only have one H1. Here, there's two H2s. So it doesn't match only of type. Does that make sense? And then if I do last of type, I'm going to match that last H2 right here. There's two H2s. It says last of type. It's going to be the last of that type. It's going to be the last of that type of paragraph, which is paragraph. It's going to be the last of type for the H1. So there's lots of things that match last of type. It is the type of element. So that's the difference between child versus of type. Of type is what type of element it is, like an element selector, and child is basically location, nesting. Okay, let's go back to our talk now that we've opened like 15 slides. I think we're here. Yeah. Okay. So now that we know what first child is, last child is, first of type, last of type, and only child and only of type, we can go a little bit further and add an n equation to that. So nth child, if I had done just 1 here, nth child 1, that would be the first child, right? But I have 3n. So what that means is an iteration of 3 every third child. So it would be the 3rd, the 6th, the 9th, the 12th. If I did -1, it would have been the 2nd, the 5th, the 8th, the 11th. And then I can't count further after that because I'm not counting backwards at the doctor's office to see if I'm sober. So there's two key terms. We have even and odd. And then we have the equation an plus b. You don't have to put the b. If the b wasn't there in our 3n example, it was just 0, right? That is 3n plus b where the b is 0. When we had the -1, it was 3, it was an plus b, and the plus was plus -1, the negative number. If we just have a digit, there's no n, it means only the 5th. It would be 0n plus 5 is basically what that says. Because we don't have a, I forget the word from algebra. I took algebra in 1979. So it's when you multiply by 3, it's the what? No. None of us. Everyone is setting something else different. So I'm going to look. Yeah. It's the thingy. So the thingy is. I literally got 12 different answers, and I don't know which one of you is right. So I'm not going to pick. Thingy. I like Bruce's. Yeah. It counts. Yes, CSS counts from 1. So 3n, 3 times 0, right, is 0, so it doesn't show anything. That doesn't target anything because there's no 0. Arrays it's not really an array, but when it counts how many elements you have, the first one is number 1. So 3n, 3 times 0. N is a number. Right, so n, if you replace it with 1, it would be, or with 0, it would be 0. If you replace it with 1, the n is like, it's the multiplier. 3 is the multiplier, but it has a different term, and I don't know what that term is, and I'll look it up. The thingy. Okay, and then new, we actually have an plus b of s. Because when you actually have these structural selectors, they're basically, I said of type and child, but I didn't say class. So it's not like, it is basically going to say, is this the first child? It doesn't matter what the class is. You can add a class to it. Is it the first child that matches this class? But if it's a different class, it's not going to look for the first one of that class. But with a little thing on the bottom there, which is just starting to be supported, you can do that. So let's go into this a little bit more. And let's zoom in so we can see it. Okay, so in this example here, it says first child and last child make the font weight bold. So number 1 here and number 32, they're both bold. First and last of type, and since it's a list, it's always going to be an LI, it's going to be the first child, and it's also going to be the first of its type. Yes?
Which has the greater specificity, these or class select?
Same specificity. So it would be as if it was .li first child. It would be the same specificity. So that has a specificity of 0-1-1. One for the 0-1, the 0-0-1 for the LI, which is an element selector, and the 0-1-0 for the class selector, which is first child. So it's a pseudo-class. It has the same weight as a class selector. Okay, next, nth child even make the background gray. And so all the even ones, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, they're all gray. Odd, make it white. They all have a background that's white. And you can't see it up there, but it actually is lighter than the background because the background is EF, EF, EF on these slides. Then it says nth child 3, make the color gray. So that's saying just the third one. If I had done just the fifth one, or if I did just the ninth one, you see all my slides are interactive because I did a style display block on all of these things. So that just picks one. It's 0n plus b, and b is 9 in that case. Nth of type 4 and color red. So every fourth one is going to be red. So if you look at 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, they're all red. And then 3n minus 1, which means every third one, starting with 3 minus 1, which is 2, make it align right. So you have 2, 5, 8, 11, 14, 17, 20, 23, 26, and 29. When it's up on the board, it's much easier for me to do the math. So that's the structural selectors. Does this make sense to people? Okay. So before we had Flexbox, we could actually do Flexbox by saying I want 3 items on this line or 2 items. And so this is no longer necessary, but this was a little trick, which is if it's only of its type, make it 100% across. So make it one bigger. If it is nth type of 1, so I didn't really go over last of type. So let me just go over last of type a little bit more because I think I need to go over that. Okay, so here I did nth of type. Let me go to the one that says 9. It says nth child. So if I do nth last child, $32. Oh, I overwrote it with the red. 8. There we go. So you see number 25? Right here, number 25. There's a total of 32. So what I did here is I said nth last child 8. So I started counting from the bottom. So you could actually do tilde li, and I made the last 8 children gray. So when I said you don't need a class, can you imagine if you just wanted the last 5 children not to show? Like, I don't know why you wouldn't want the last 5 children not to show, but hey. But you might want the first 5 children, like, oh, I know who would want this. The New York Times. So it's like they show you the first paragraph and they're like, pay money or we won't show it to you. So they're like, paragraph 3, nth last of child 3 tilde paragraph, don't show. What? I love developer tools for the New York Times. You should subscribe to the New York Times if you're reading the New York Times. Support real media. Okay. But don't support crap journalism like Breitbart. Not that I'm getting political, but I'm getting political. So on this one, nth of type 1, nth last of type 3. So that means this element has to be the first of its type and third from the bottom. Third of its type and the last one. So if this element is the first of its type and the third from the last, that means it's exactly 3 items, right? This means it's exactly 3 items. This means it's exactly 3 items, but pick the third one. And this means there's exactly 3 items, but pick the second one. And then you could put a width of 33 because you knew there was exactly 3 items. And you could do the same thing with 4 items. This got a little bit big, but you could actually do Flexbox before we had Flexbox. So this is, if you want to play along at home, you can basically style this and do it any way you want. I am going to just make it a little bit. So I'm going to do 3n, 3n, 3n plus 1. I'm going to do diagonal lines. 3n plus 1. And then I have to add 1 more. Plus 2. And there I just have diagonal lines of red cells going through. So you can really reach any element you want. In fact, you can make the American flag. So basically, this is the exact same code as the previous page. If I do this, I just made the American flag. So you can see it's just a table with cells. So what did I do? Let's go through the code. I basically said, make the whole thing white. Every cell, just make it white. I cleared everything out. And then I said, find every TD that comes after the 8th cell, right? In every odd row. And make it red. So starting from the 8th cell right here to the end, I've made it red on each odd row, except for when I start with the 9th row, just make every TD red. And so that's why here I'm only making 8 on red, and then for the bottom, starting with row 9, every even one I'm making red. Then I'm saying starting with the 9th, starting from the 9th from the bottom and 7 over, everything before that, make it blue. And in those cells, everything starting from the, start from the bottom, go up, and then continue. So it's counting, it's saying start counting at the 9th one, and then go to 8, 7, 6, 5, because you're basically starting from the bottom. So it's like 10th from the end, 11th from the end, 12th from the end. So it's going this way and this way. Make those blue, and those exact same cells, give them a star, and I can change it from a star to something else. Who knows what? Ooh, a hollow star. What I love about these is I never know what I'm going to get. Okay, and then I moved every other row over by 14 pixels to make them on. And it's not actually the American flag because it doesn't have 50 stars, but close enough. Okay, structural selectors level 4. We are getting AN plus B of S. So that is saying everything so far has been, without a class, nothing else there. But what if we only wanted them if they match something else? We couldn't do that before. We could do like nth child. Let me just go back here to a place where I can write. Okay, I could have done li foo, right? Nth type 3n. So it didn't actually match anything because I don't have any class of foo. But even if I did, it would only match the ones that it was supposed to match originally, and then check to see if it had the class of foo and match it then. But I actually want to say every fifth foo. I don't want every element. I only want every fifth foo element. Then you can do that with here. So select the third li with the class of foo. So nth child 3 of li foo, right? So it's going through all the LIs that have the class of foo and matching the third one. So the first item has one, the fifth item has one, and the 8th item has one. So the 8th item is the third one that has foo, and so it would match number 8, not number 3. If I had said nth child 3 class foo, I wouldn't have matched anything because that number 3, item 3, doesn't have the class of foo. Let me show it to you in action in Safari. Safari is so backwards on everything except for this. And look at that, it's red, but the slides don't work, so that's okay. Okay, so yeah, they're working. There was this, it just took much longer to render because why not? So here it says nth child 2n of foo, which means every other foo. I could have also done even of foo. So it's item number 8, but it's the second one to have foo. It's the 4th one to have foo. It's the 6th one to have foo. So it's not meeting the odd ones. And if I'd done, oops. And if I changed it to odd, then it would have been the odd ones. So this is coming. As you can see, it works in Safari, and that's it so far. That'll be cool. Okay, now we're going on to other selectors. Root is basically the HTML element or the SVG element. Generally, I mean, you might be using some other root, but it'll work for whatever root you choose. Root is a good place to put your font size. And then you can just use a relative root M units, rems. It's a good place if you're using variables. There's going to be a variables module. That link does not work yet. And it's also really good if you are showing your head like I am. I'm showing my styles. I can put styles on the root and it will show in my style block. So there's other logical combinators: negation, matching, and parents. So let's start with the not. So not is basically you do a regular selector and then you say, but not if it's this. So S1, in this case, it's a div. Match all the divs except for if the div has a class of exclude me. I could put nth of type 3 in here. So it only takes simple selectors. So nth of type 3 might not sound that simple, since for some people might have just learned it, but it's considered a simple selector because there's no space or combinators. So basically you can put selectors that don't have combinators in the not here. So the not itself has no specificity. There's no weight. So here, E not S1, it would be the specificity of whatever E is and the specificity of whatever S1 is. So this is a class selector, so we have an element and a class. If I had put my ID, it would have been 3-0-1, the 3 for the ID. I mean, yeah, sorry, it would have been 101, the 100 for the ID, and the 001 for the div. Oh, and here's how I show it. I should have read ahead. Or someone should have told me. It's supported everywhere since IE9, so even the people who should be looking for new jobs because they still have to support IE10 can use it. Okay, not supported yet, or actually supported in Safari. You can put more than one selector there. And the specificity of that, so let's say if we do exclude me and excuse you, the specificity of this is actually the element or the selector that has the highest specificity in this block. So even though it might be matching the exclude me, well, it's not matching, it's purposely not matching, it's going to be a 1, 0, 0. So remember how I told you like 6.5 hours ago that if a browser doesn't recognize a pseudo-class, the entire selector block fails? They're making it so if it's in the not, if it doesn't recognize something in the not, don't worry, it won't fail. So they resolved, and I have a link to the conversation if you don't believe me. Because it's not actually in the specification, it's when I wrote this. Drop individual invalid selectors from selectors list in all selector functions that take such lists except for not. Drop individual. So we'll see how that comes out. I think I just totally said everything just wrong right now. Drop individual valid selectors from selectors list in all selector functions that take such lists except for not. So everything in not has to be valid. I'm going to argue with them about the specification. So just realize that this might be the stuff that we're going over now that's in the parentheses might be an exception to that the whole selector block being invalid thing.
So does that mean that if you have an invalid selector in like a comma list, it won't get rid of that whole rule, or does it ignore that invalid selector?
It should just invalidate that one selector and not the whole. But what I'm saying is this was just discussed, so it's new and I'm not sure. So I will have to look at how they put it out. Because this is actually from a WCAG discussion, or from a GitHub. It's on GitHub, and it was an issue, and so it's not in the specification yet. It says resolved, so I think they resolved it, but I'm not sure exactly how it's going to play out. So negation. So here, let me make it bigger again, and it said li, not first child, not last child, make it red. Font weight bold. And why is nothing red? I have a typo in here somewhere. Oh, you know why it's red? It doesn't understand the dual selector right there. So this browser, this would work in Safari, it would not work here, so let's just get rid of this part. So it's making everything red except for the first child and last child, because I say don't make it red. And there's a number 13 underneath, and for some reason I can't go down there. Oh, I could do this. There. Oop. Because it's matching this one. And it shouldn't be matching that one. So let's get rid of this. Okay. Who knows why that was breaking? It could have been a copy-paste error as well. Okay, so it's basically saying make everything, make the first child blue, which it did. And then it's saying make everything, all the list items except not the first child and not the last child, make them red. In the future, instead of having to do multiple nots, we'll be able to just do this. But right now that is not supported except for in Safari. So let's go over to Safari. Move forward a few items. And there it worked. See, it works in Safari. Cool beans. Let's go back to this. Okay. So then we have this thing called is. And this is basically a replacement for Sass. Except for it's not supported anywhere yet. But there were two other things that were supported, which was matches or any. So it's already usable in pretty much all the browsers. So they resolved to rename matches to is and deprecate matches. So what we are going to have is any element that is, and then you can do like header, footer, and let me show you an example. So here I can say an li that either has a title or a role. that follow, or a link that is a descendant of an li that either has a title or a role, which would be the same thing as writing this. Right now it's easier to just write that, but you can get really complex selectors. Like in this next example, if I do, and I'm using the deprecated matches instead of is, but we can do the is. Or can we? Nope, this is not editable. Okay, so it basically says any A that is active or focus, that's nested inside an aside, that is nested either in a contact or home. And so it would be the same as writing all of this out, which is A active inside an aside inside home, A active inside an aside inside contact, A focus inside an aside that is inside home, or A focus in an aside that's inside contact. So that's a lot to write out, but if you have ever used SAS or less and have nested stuff, you know that your selectors that get produced are crazy, right? And you're sending this much selectors. I was telling people at break that there was one time, if you look at DC water site, the municipal water site, they have 812 selectors to move something over 2 pixels. And the reason they have 812 things is because they nested and 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 woo, did they nest. So the matches works in Safari. The Moz Any works in Mozilla. The WebKit Any works in Chrome. So we can actually do this now. So here, if we do an H1 that is nested inside an aside or an article that is nested inside an aside or article, this is what we get. And another example is we could, in the future, we'll just be able to write this line. I forgot the nav here. Okay, so if we just can write just one line in the future, so let's get rid of those. So it's basically the same as writing all of this. Okay, so one more example, because this might actually make more sense to you, because I actually used real SAS down here. And let's just navigate down here. Oh, so I was afraid that would happen. Oh, here it is. Nope. Okay. Okay. So this is what most of us are writing now using SAS. We're saying footer, aside, or header, right? That's the parent. Anything that is content editable, when you hover over it, use a cursor that's a pointer and make the color blue. When you hover over a content editable that is using a footer, aside, or header, do that. The output that comes out is this, right? Or, depending on how you wrote it, that. Right? So it's going to be, this is what we're doing now to get this, but in the end, what we're sending down the pipe will be this, which is much smaller. So it doesn't sound like it's, when I was explaining it like a minute ago, it didn't sound like why do we need this since we can just do, use SAS. That is fewer bytes, and it's going to produce the same thing. So that'll be awesome when that's supported. The specificity rules of the is the weight of the most specific thing here. So here I did is, ul, ol, or list. The specificity will be this one for all 3 of them. Okay. Best thing, this is my favorite, not supported anywhere, but is where. Have you ever written a link and you want it when it's your whole site, you want all the links to be this way, and then when you hover it, you want it to be this other way? Except for in this scenario. And so you add the hover, which is adding a class, and you're like, shit, where's my, A:hover is 0, 1, 1. And so you can't do nav A, make it blue, because it's, : link, red, you already made it red earlier. You can actually, with the where, add features without adding any specificity. So it's the same as is. It'll be like Sass, except for whatever is in the where has no weight whatsoever. So it's making something more specific without adding any weight, specificity weight. So this was the example. If I do a not hover, text decoration none, right? It means any a, when you're not hovering it, don't have text decoration, right? Well, this is 0, 1, 1. And so when I do nav a, I really want my links in my navigation to have an underline. I can't because I have all this weight already. So if I do where not hover, this is actually more specific than this now because this is just a 0, 0, 1. So that is going to be amazing. Okay, parent selector. Woo! This is another thing, except for it's not going to just be in your CSS. It's going to be something that is going to be usable in your JavaScript. So it basically does whatever I'm talking about, like my header. Inside my header of my page, does it have an actual header? Like, is it an actual header or is it just the header of the page? Whatever. So I can do a document query selector all, and it says find a header that has a heading inside it. Then we have linguistic pseudo-classes. So I showed you the earlier ones, right? HTML lang pipe equals n, that's going to match the HTML, only match the HTML element. A lot of stuff will be inherited because a lot of CSS properties and values are inherited, but it only matches that one element. Whereas when you do a lang, it's actually, is this Chinese? And lang already exists here. That's CSS 2.1, which I need to add a slide on that. Any type of Chinese or language that they speak in China. So it would be Mandarin Chinese, and I don't know anything about languages or linguistics, so I don't know what else would be put there. But it's basically, I could do EN, so any version of English, or EN US. And that would match any element that is in English in my document, even if that element doesn't have that language specified on that element itself. If an ancestor is saying this is going to be English US, then this is English US. If it's saying it's French or French from France, because Quebecois is not French. Did I just say that? Yes. Yeah? No, because they're not case sensitive. And then direction, left to right and right to left. I should do a slide on it. No, that's good enough because this is the selector for direction. Okay. Link, location, user action. We already discussed link and visited. There's also any link and local link. So local link is a link that's in the page, and any link is any type of link, so anything that would have link or visited. So instead of putting link and visited, you can put any link. So the any link would match anything that's an area, or a link. And it's actually supported. Local link matches something that's a link that's in the current document. So it's a link to itself, such as a target in the page, like link going to # something. Not local would be an external link, which we did earlier as href starts with HTTP. We're nearing the end, but we still have the specificity afterwards, and you don't want to miss that, even though, it's way past my bedtime. Okay, so we have hover, active, and focus, and then we have focus visible and focus within. Focus within is so cool. So this paragraph right here is not editable, so you see I'm highlighting it. But if focus is within this element, if there's focus within the form, make the background of this form black and the text white. And so when I enter here, so it's kind of like a parent or an ancestor of something that has focus. So that is totally awesome. Then we have hover, active, and focus. And we've already covered these enough in terms of other elements that we've covered so far. I just want to point out that never, ever, 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 and never, I mean never, remove focus from elements that should have focus. If an element is interactive, you can interact with an element, it has to have focus, because not everyone uses a mouse or their fingertips. They use a keyboard to navigate, and they need to know where they are. So focus visible will improve accessibility, and I'm going to show you how it works. So the last two elements right here, the last two have focus visible with Moz focus ring, which is how it's supported right now. And focus visible is how it's going to be supported. And I'm clicking into this, and then I am tabbing. And then I am tabbing onto focus visible, and it got a border. And I'm tabbing onto this button, and it got a border. Now, if I actually click on this, right? It's a button, right? I'm clicking on a button, but it doesn't have focus. I can only get focus on that button. I can make it active, but I'm not giving focus to the button, because the actually button should be submitting or doing something. But as a keyboard user, if I'm tabbing to it, I need to know that that has focus. And so this is huge for keyboard users. Other pseudo-classes, target and target within. Target within I did not cover, and I actually wrote a slide that just says what the spec is, because it's not implemented anywhere and it didn't quite make sense to me. But I think it's going to be an element that has the target has the target within it. So target is when you do a hashtag something and you land on the page somewhere, that is the target of the page. So in this case, oops, 0. I didn't do an overflow hidden. So let me just do div overflow hidden. Okay, so right now nothing is selected, but when I tab on tab 1, it is actually a link, and it has a pound sign and it says tab 1. And when I click on it, that one becomes the active one. And so I've reached it by saying the A that is the direct child of the section that is the target of the page, make the background color white and the border bottom white as well. The other ones, the ones that are not the current target, they're currently gray and the text is black. So if I take on 2 or 3, you see how I'm clicking on those targets. But the cool thing is you see the text is changing, right? It's because the section right here, the div that is a direct child of the section that is not the target has a z-index of -2. And the div that is a direct child of the section that is the target has a z-index of -1. So it's a higher z-index, so it's on top. This is thanks to Chris Coyer like 10 years ago. Okay, scope. It's coming down the pipe, and I'm not going to explain it. I just want you to know that it will exist. Grid structural selectors. It's coming down the pipe. You can actually select which grid element you want, either with nth column AN plus B with that syntax that we learned before, or double pipes. There's time dimensional ones. There's video and audio of playing and pause, so you can match a video that is currently playing or currently paused, or audio that is currently playing or currently paused. So if it's paused, or hovered, you can show the controls and not show the controls when it's playing, something like that. And then there's practice, and then there's next. So before I go on to the next section, FrontEnd Masters is actually going to cover all of these. These are not live yet. If you come back in 5 weeks, they will be live. Okay, so they're not all live yet, so don't share them, but you can share the selectors one. So just Specificity, yes, I want to leave the page. Okay, specificity. We're going to go through specificity, a few tests, and then I'm not going to do the test, but I'll show you how it works. Specificity. We showed you this, and I'm just going to cover a few of them. Or I'm going to, yeah, here. So I'm just going to cover, let's do 2 here. So li, nth of type 3n tilde li. Anyone want to tell me what the specificity of it is without looking at the bottom? We have, okay, so here we have input of type, or that has a type attribute, but does not have a class, like doesn't have the class my class. So this is a specificity of 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. So that would be 1, 0, 2. So I want you to take a look at this later on, print it, keep it above your desk, fully understand it. But note a few things that I need to point out from these. The global selector knows it does match elements, so it has a specificity of 0. It does have specificity, but the value is 0. Type selector is 0, 0, 1, class selector is 0, 1, 0, and those include all of the attribute selectors and the pseudo-classes. ID selectors avoid 1, 0, 0. Inline styles, keep your JS out of my CSS. Important is the nuclear bomb option, but only on that value. So it's not actually a selector thing. It's only for that property value pair on that selector. The less than obvious is that the tilde, the greater than sign, the space, and the plus have no value. Right? No value. The I and the S have no value. So those combinators don't add, they make things more specific, but they don't add specificity weight. The not has no value, but this parameter does. And when we'll be able to have more than one, it'll be the most specific of those parameters. Specificity versus inheritance. Carlos asked me this, and of course he's gone. Specificity is not inheritance. When I showed you that page that was all green because we used the global selector, and then after that it said body color equals red, and he asked me if body, why was it not red? Because color is inherited, right? So all that page should have been red except for the elements that I specifically made green, and by using the global selector I made every single element green. So the body itself was red, but the body doesn't have a text node, but every other node inside of it, every DOM element was turned to green. Parameters, when you have parameters, the weight is going to be the one that's the highest, except for where. What happens with where? Doesn't add any specificity. But here it's going to be 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, and this one I do not know. I asked someone in the working group, and they haven't gotten back to me as of this morning. So don't use important. Instead, you can do things like hacks. Like instead of using disabled and say default cursor important, you can say disable, disable, disabled. So what the browser does is it says, does this element have the disabled class? Yes, so it matches. Does it have the disabled class? Oh, yes, it does, so it matches. And does it have a disabled class? Oh, yes, it does, so it matches. It doesn't say, oh, I already matched that one, I can't match it again. It actually matches all. So that is 030. If someone, you're using a third party and they used they used their widget, right? You want to get more specific than their thing here. Okay. This is their code, this is yours. You can make it blue by doing ###. That has the specificity of 2-0-0, which is stronger than their one. If you ever do this, comment it out and explain why, because this is a hack. but it allows you to overwrite someone else's specificity without adding the term important. Okay. And in case of emergency, you can just say not, and you have now made all of the links on your site, right? This right there, have made all of your links on your site have a specificity of 3-0-1. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So the last slide here is actually a quiz, so you can test your own specificity at home. And so the first one I'll answer for you is 0-0-1, right? And then at the end, when you're all done, you can do check answers, and it actually uses valid and invalid to color it red or green. And the cascade, last slide. Okay, the cascade. So we've talked about specificity, but there are different style sheets. You are right here. You are the author. No matter what you write, if it's an animation, will overwrite, any animation will overwrite any authored styles, unless you have an important. And this is used to be inverted, so you can actually right now overwrite important in Chrome with animations, but it doesn't work in Firefox. And then important user declarations and important user agent declarations, and then transition declarations actually overwrite all of the above. So that's the cascade in terms of, so when multiple declarations have equal specificity, the last declaration found in the CSS is applied to the element. So generally the one closest to the element itself. And if you want to learn about pseudo elements, you can come to my talk at midnight. That's all.